Hey guys, so today we are going to start looking at monopolies. It is the second last market structure of the four market structures that you have to know for the Leaving Cert. And then also, I suppose the good news is that because you guys are doing the new course, it is the last market structure where you need to know how to draw the short and long run curve. And I suppose the good news on that is there is only one curve, so there's only one graph for long run and short run for a monopolistic firm. So first of all, what is monopoly? Monopoly is just one company providing a good or service in an industry. And an example in Ireland is Irish Rail, and we know that Irish Rail is a state-owned service. There is no other provider of train services in Ireland, and as a result, Irish Rail have the, Iarnród Éireann is the old name for Irish Rail, have the monopoly of the market. There also would have been quite a number of pharmaceutical companies in Ireland that had patents that ran out in the last number of years. So for example, the patent for cold sore creams like Virax ran out in the last 10 years or so. We see it now at the minute with coronavirus vaccine. You have a number of pharmaceutical companies initially were at war trying to get be the first to come out with the vaccine and get it approved. We also in the last number of years seen where a monopoly is not a good thing. So for example, Martin Sharknelly, who had bought the patent for the AIDS drug, and I think initially the AIDS drug per tablet was $7, and he increased that to $750 per tablet, and then was brought up in court on a human rights violation, obviously because he felt that if he charged €750 per tablet, governments would tend to fund this drug, and therefore they would pay it, but then no government can really afford €750 per tablet for a particular drug for an illness, and therefore it was brought up on a human rights issue. So in this video we're just going to look at the assumptions and the advantages of monopoly. So first of all, there's one firm in the industry. This means there is no distinction between the firm and the industry. One firm supplies the entire output. The second thing is that they either control price or output, but as you can see here, they cannot control both. So if they're going to set the price, the output produced will be determined by the consumers. So for example, train tickets in Ireland. But if it sets the output, the price will be determined by the market. So Maserati cars would be a good example of this. This is what we would call, I suppose, a niche market. And Maserati will have come out with for very, very high-end cars that they may only decide to produce 10 cars. And then demand will set the price. So what they will do is they will issue these 10 cars. They might have a starting price, but then it's those who bid. So demand determines price, and it is going to be the consumers themselves that will actually bid for the cars. So effectively, if we look at this as a snob good, because the more expensive it becomes, and obviously the more rare it is, the more people will demand of it, and therefore that drives up the price, because obviously there is a set number. So the firm's aim is to maximise profits. We've seen this aim before in both perfect competition and imperfect competition. The firm can earn SNPs, so supernormal profits, in both the long and the short run. That's the only difference between perfect and imperfect. We see that in perfect competition, other firms enter into the market, drives down the price, therefore drives down the profit, and similarly for imperfect competition. But in the long and the short run, the monopolist actually can earn supernormal profits. And we know, as always, profit maximisation occurs when MC is equal to MR, so marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. And finally, barriers to entry exist. So if the monopoly market structure is to continue to exist in the long run, that is that firms would make supernormal profits in the long run, there cannot be freedom of entry and exit into the industry. So a really good example of this, and most of you will know, an example of a barrier to entry will be a patent. And that is where a company gets the sole right to produce a product for a period of time, or even a service for a period of time. So we will see this with the COVID vaccine, where the companies involved, Pfizer being one of them, will patent that product, their version of it, and they'll patent it maybe for a number of years. I know because it's a pandemic, we're going to see maybe that product being shared among a number of pharmaceutical companies to try and get as many of them out as possible. But a really good example, one I referred to earlier, was the cold sore cream. So the drug that was used to cure cold sores, that would have had a patent for maybe, I think 15 years is roughly the patent now for a pharmaceutical company or a pharmaceutical product. And what they do is they will patent it, and the reason for that is they would have put in a lot of money or invested a lot of money for research and development, and because of that they need to be able to make that money back. So the best way for them to make that money back is to be the sole producer, and then as a result they can charge whatever price they want. So we would have seen that with Martin Shrapnelli buying up the patent for the AIDS drug. However, if we look at the cold sore cream itself, so Zavirax would have been the producer of the cold sore cream initially. It would have been like, for that tiny little tube, if you're familiar with it, would have been about 12-13 euro, whereas now we see it's as low as €5. And that's because the patent ran out. Other companies then were allowed to produce their own version of it. So some advantages of monopoly, because I've been talking a lot there about how monopolists tend to set the highest price, which is obviously a huge disadvantage. But what advantages do we have in monopoly? Well, first of all, economies of scale. So economies of scale are basically where we have a savings in the cost of production. So where you have a large monopoly who decides that they are going to control the output instead, and then let obviously demand determine the price, they can produce on a large scale, and as a result it helps the firm benefit from economies of scale, and then these cost savings may be passed on to the consumer. The second one then is a guarantee of supply of a product or a service. So the supply of the product or service may be guaranteed and provided where profit is minimal. So if, for example, we talked about the state monopoly of Irish Rail, so consumers would benefit. And in particular here we could look at, so an example being stations in rural Ireland that maybe aren't as profitable, but that the service is still being provided to them. So we would have seen that in the role of the government, and that was the purpose of semi-state bodies. The third one then being employment. So as there is no competition, employees have greater security of employment, and they may benefit from preferential conditions of employment, better rates of pay or better benefits. We see this a lot if we think of the brand leader in search engines, which would be Google. People would feel that Google have a monopoly on search engines, even though we know there's such one as like Yahoo and Bing. Google definitely are the monopolist there. So, and we are all aware of how Google employees have really, really good benefits. They are really well looked after, and that's because they are the monopolist in that particular sector. Finally, we see a reduced use of scarce resources, so there may be less duplication in the provision of products and services, so that we don't have products or services that are repeated, and therefore there's waste, so there may be less need for competitive advertising, and as a result society's resources are not wasted. Finally, we have potential for research and development. The supernormal profits that monopolies make could be used for investment in R&D and then to further secure their dominance in the market. If we look at, for example, there, Microsoft. Microsoft have dominated the Office market, so that being the software market for things like Word, your Excel spreadsheet, so that spreadsheet processing. Now I know Apple have their own version now, but for a very long time Microsoft was really the only version that you could use on any particular computer. And over time we would have seen them do more research and development into how they could improve their product. So maybe years ago we started out with Word and Excel. Now we have Word, Excel, we have OneDrive, there is I use Microsoft Lens. So there's loads of different types of software that Microsoft have developed, as a result of being the monopolist in that market for such a long time, making huge levels of profit, and then as a result reinvesting that profit back into their product.